Thanks for joining me. My name is Samuel Baruffi, and I'm a Principal Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. Today, I'll be presenting about how you can craft a secure and scalable generative AI solution using AWS services. My goal is to show some open source code and open source solution that allows you and your platform engineering teams to potentially have your own private solution to expedite with Gen AI. So let's get started. So this is a very common scenario across any role that pretty much uses technology. You're probably spending hours and hours writing repetitive tasks, writing repetitive code snippets, emails to your manager, maybe reports to your leadership, creating different proposals if you're working on consultancy. And it's a lot of tedious and it's overwhelming, right? The image just illustrates how potentially all of us feel on a normal day as we deliver and progress on our job duties. But what if we could find solutions that are private, secure, and available for us and our teams to really alleviate the burden of those repetitive solutions, right? We're all familiar with tools like such as ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity, and many other ones that have become very popular in the last 2 years. So my goal is not to show you a replacement of those tools, but potentially show you an architecture and a solution that is open source that you can build on top of that and really have full control of your data and security and deploy that on AWS. So because this is Platform Engineering Conference, it's important to set the context a little bit on how potentially a solution like the one I'm about to present could help platform engineer or platform engineering teams. So it's very important that platform engineers focus on as a catalyst for developer productivity, right? So you want to enable a lot of self-servicing solutions and really reduce operational bottlenecks. Generative AI really allows you to become a much more productive developer and platform engineer. You also want to navigate the complex of modern tech stack. AWS is an example that we have over 200 services, and getting in depth and getting to know really then takes a lot of effort, and Gen AI can help us expedite that learning curve. You also want to balance innovation with stability. We don't just want to move as fast as possible with no stability because they'll probably give us some downturns. That is another goal that you should have. And you want to ensure consistent security and compliance. And that is potentially one of the main points of why potentially you should consider building a solution for your team that you have full control rather than buying something outside, or if you're not comfortable, it's completely up to your choice. And you want to enhance your customers, which are developers. You want to enhance their experience by using your platform. So with that said, at a very high level, what I'm going to show to you today, both from a solution architecture pattern and a UI, is you're going to have a UI where you can input text and images. That solution is hosted within your own AWS account with your own security controls, and you have full control about the data and the authorization, who authenticated, who has permissions of the solution. Once the data is processed, you're going to send to some AWS services that we're going to talk today, like Bedrock, where it allows you to call large language models or multimodality models on a pay-as-you-go per token input and output token. So you're going to have that processing and generation for you, and then you are going to have the polished content, right? So what I'm going to do next, I'll show you some capabilities of the solution that I have open source as part of the AWS samples GitHub repository. And just keep in mind, this is not a recommendation for you to just use the solution that is available on GitHub as it is, but also for you to look at it and build on top of that. Also look at the solution as an architecture pattern for potentially building applications for your teams, for your platform engineer teams with a similar capability, because it does solve a lot of the problems that generative AI have posed to us in the last couple of years. So let's just look what the solution could look like. So the idea of this solution is you're going to have a UI. The UI is going to be authenticated. So you're going to be able to create users and each user is going to have its own secure sandbox environment. In this case, on the demo here, you have a playground platform, which is a very simple place where you can input some text. You can select models. Right now, the solution supports cloud models for Anthropic through AWS Bedrock. So in this demo, you can see that it has a couple of things that are really important. First of them is you are authenticated into the solution. Second is it supports the streaming of your response, right? So you're going to send a prompt, like write a poem about New York. That response is going to be streaming from AWS account into the UI here. And then you are able to manipulate, copy, and do whatever you want, right? That is really important. So that is just one of the capabilities is Playground. But Playground, there is nothing new. It's just a way for you to maybe do some testing and play around. The really important benefit of this UI, if you think about it, or this solution, is the capability of create templates. Templates are nothing more than a way for you to create prompts. So if you're familiar with generative AI, it's really important that you do a lot of prompt engineering for whatever you're trying to do. So in the example on the screen, let's say you want to create a prompt that is really good at creating product names, right? I know it's a simplistic example, but you can think about anything here, right? So what the tool allows you to do is to create templates that can be reused after the fact by you, or if you decide, by other people. You can see that the templates allows you to have a visibility of public and private. What the public and private means is public means only people that are authenticated to your deployed solution who have access, but every user within that deployment will have access to it, but the user needs to be authenticated. A private visibility means only you as the creator will be able to consume that. And you can create prompts. We're going to allow you to input a model selection that you have curated a prompt for, a system prompt giving a specific instruction, and finally the user data. If you see here in the user data and putting the input data between curly brackets and the $sign, that is just an automatic variable that when you're going to be able to consume the template, I'm going to show in a moment, when you consume the template, whatever data you're going to be providing is going to automatically replace that variable for you. And you have easy searchability on the solution. As a user now, you can either consume already curated or created templates from your team, or you can create your own templates or make those templates available for your team by setting as public here. But it's important to highlight public just doesn't mean that anyone outside the internet will be able to access. It's just within your deployed solution here, users who have authenticated will be able to consume that within this box of authentication. Once you have created the templates, you can go into the activity tab and you are able to select specific prompts. In this case, I will show you an example that I want to use the product naming pro template. So I want to create names for my product. I select the product template and then I give a description, right? Descriptions like, hey, I want to create a noise canceller headless headphone. How do I actually create that? So you'll be able to see that what happens here, it actually sends to AWS and Bedrock the whole prompt curated with your data, and it provides you with the proper output. And then you can inspect what that template, if you're an advanced user, you can inspect what that template is adding, like the system prompt and what is getting replaced, the input data with whatever information, right? And you are able to change those advanced settings of every time you do the inference, right? So now from your teams, this becomes very interesting because it allows you to have multiple templates that a user can be an expert, but he can share that template and that prompt with other people for easy of consumption. Another very important feature of the solution is the capability of providing images as an input. All those Claude 3 models that the solution is currently using from Anthropic support what is called the multimodality, meaning it supports text and also image as inputs. So in this case, I have uploaded a headphone picture and I've said, could you please describe the image uploaded in details to me? And you can see it describes in detail. Now, I'm using the playground here, but this vision capability can also be added into the template. I can have a template that has curated prompt, and once I consume the template on the activity, I can input images that enhance my data input to the system itself, right? So far, you were able to see how you can easily check the playground, how you can create templates, which are curated prompts, how you can consume those templates. A common thing that these generative AI solutions provide is the capability of using a chat conversation, right? So the tool also provides you with the ability to use chat. And as you might expect, the chat allows you to also select templates. So you can keep the context of your conversation of the first prompt. In this example here, I'm using again the product naming template, and I've asked with a specific description, and it was sent to the model, and I received some answers back, and I can say, the names are good, but could you please come up with 5 more different names that are a bit more catchy and are great for marketing, right? And you can see that I will send it again, the context, and all that is being baked already from the back in the backend that we're gonna demonstrate in a moment. And if you are an advanced user and you wanna choose different temperature or top K or top P, you have that capability. We haven't talked about another capability of this tool, which is the history. Every time you use the playground, the activity, and the activity or templates, that data will be stored on a database that you have control within your AWS account, and you can check the history, right? So you have the capability. So far, I've shown you the capabilities and the end product. But okay, you've seen the capabilities, you've seen the potential, the benefits of this tool. But you might be asking me right now, how does this work under the hood? What is the architecture that you've put in place in order to make this happen with the streaming, with the authentication and all that? How much does it cost, right? How can you be so sure that it's cost efficient, right? So those are all very great questions. And my intent for the next maybe 15 minutes is to really answer some of those questions to you. So the solution here aims to achieve, so the name of the solution that we have open source, and I'm going to share you with some of the links and some of the codes that you can see. The solution aims to, the name of the solution is Improve Employee Productivity with Generative AI Assistant Example. That is the name of the solution. What it aims to do is to automate a lot of the repetitive tasks with AI, and it's all built on AWS serverless services. We're going to talk about that in a moment, and Bedrock. We're also going to talk about Bedrock in a moment if you're not familiar. The benefits is it boosts your productivity, it really streamlines workflows with the reusability of templates, it is scalable because you're going to be able to have 1 user or 5,000 users, and the application should scale with those growth of users because the serverless capability, and it's open source with a very simple deployment that I'm going to show on the demo, the instructions, and on GitHub for you. But remember, this is an architecture partner. It's not a full-fledged solution. I'm not here selling the solution as for you to go and deploy in production and say, okay, Sam has told me to do this, it's already. This is an architecture pattern that you can look at the example, build more features, build new capabilities, change specific settings to meet your customer, your own company demands or requirements, and so forth. Let's talk about some of the services that we've used into this solution before I show an architecture diagram. So here are a list of all the services that are going to be used if you deploy this solution on your AWS account. So you can see a list of 9 services. So let's start with a very, I'm not gonna go and explain depth those services. My goal here is just to show at a high level why we are using all these services. So all these services have in mind the idea to be pay as you go. So we are not going to provision any services. You're not going to have any commitments for months or years of consumption. It's literally pay as you go. So as your usage grow, your cost is going to grow with that and also decrease with that. So because this solution is a fully API-driven architecture, we are using Amazon API Gateway for all the REST APIs. So every time you're saving a new template, every time you're trying to retrieve your history, every time you're sending a new data to the model itself, it's saving that data using REST APIs. But then the second flavor of API Gateway, which is a service on AWS, is WebSocket. And this is a very important service because on the solution that the data, every time you send some requests to the solution, the data is getting streamed back into your UI. And the way this is done is by creating a WebSocket. So each user and each web page that you use is going to create a WebSocket connection to API Gateway. And then API Gateway WebSocket will actually use a Lambda to call whatever services, in this case Bedrock, in order to retrieve the response that is generated by the large language models and send back to your. We have S3 here. S3 is used in a couple places. So first, you host the UI. The UI is built on React. So the UI, it's stored there. And then it's also used every time you upload new images for the multimodality capability. It's using S3 to store those objects, those files for you. Cognito is our IDP service. So Cognito is where you have the capability of signing into the system, having a password authentication and authorization. And Cognito integrates really heavily with the REST API and WebSocket API. So every time you're trying to call those APIs, you need to be authenticated and provide a token to it. And all the code that I'm going to share with you that is available open source on the AWS Samples GitHub have that description and capability shown. DynamoDB here is the database of choice. It's a NoSQL database available for pay-as-you-go, super scalable solution on AWS. DynamoDB here is storing everything. It's storing your chats, it's storing your templates, it's storing your history. Everything that there is data that is being stored, DynamoDB is that database. And because this DynamoDB by default is encrypted and it's going to be deployed on your own account, you have full control of the data premises and how you decide to encrypt, or maybe you just want to keep keep data for X amount of days, you have that capability as well. Three more services here. We have CloudFront. I'm just going to jump on CloudFront, which is the content delivery network capability to host our UI. So the UI is going to be hosted on S3, and CloudFront will make that available across multiple servers around the world that AWS has access. So when your users access those, it makes it very easy to consume. It also does the HTTPS encryption on your front end. WAF then is integrated with CloudFront, and you see an architecture diagram to then create security rules for avoiding DDoS attacks, SQL injection attack, cross-site script attacking. Maybe you want to limit the access into your system for specific countries, or maybe block some countries. WAF give you the capability. And then finally, it's Bedrock. And I have a couple of slides for Bedrock because really this is the generative AI solution that allows this whole architecture to be put in place and be super useful. So Bedrock is the easiest way to build and scale generative AI's applications with foundational models on AWS. Bedrock is a very feature-rich solution for this specific use case, and this architecture that I'm showing to you is we are using Bedrock to inference large language models, foundational models through a single API. So the solutions by now only supports Anthropic Claude models, but Bedrock has support for dozens of different large language models from different providers, and you can use a single API that you literally can test the prompt and the data for whatever model that is available on Bedrock and receive the response, right? So that's what we're using. The capabilities and the benefits of using Bedrock is, if you're familiar, the amount of computational that takes for any person to host a large language model is quite significant. So what we are doing here is we are letting AWS manage all that compute, and you have a pay-as-you-go approach, meaning every time you send an inference to Bedrock, you're going to be paying on different models. We have different costs, and that can be checked into the AWS pricing page for Bedrock, and you're going to be paying for the input tokens and the output tokens. What are the benefits? First, you don't need to pay for all the computational GPUs to be up and running 24/7, but also it allows you to have a pay-as-you-go. So if today you have a lot of users consuming this platform, you're going to pay for whatever they consume. If in the next month you don't have anything, you're not going to pay anything for Bedrock. No data is stored, no data is used for training any models on Bedrock. That is documented and is a guarantee that AWS makes. All the data that you send are your data. AWS doesn't store, and AWS doesn't use for training any future models. So it's full control, privacy by default, and it doesn't use any of the data moving forward. The solution itself uses a combination of different models from Bedrock, but mostly focusing on models that are from Anthropic. Anthropic is one of the leading research labs that AWS and Amazon have invested and partnered very heavily, and it's available on Bedrock. They have this Claude 3 model family, in this case currently, and by the way, depending when you're watching this presentation, it might have changed because new models are coming up very often. But as we speak I'm recording on August 22nd, 4 models of the Claude 3 family are available on Bedrock, which the most powerful one is Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is one of the best models in the industry, not just the best model for Anthropic. All of them have vision capability. Each of these models are going to have different pricing. Opus being the most expensive one, the biggest one, but is still on the Claude 3 family. And of course, Claude 3.5 is the most intelligent because it's on the 3.5. Anthropic has already announced that they're going to be coming up with 3.5 Haiku, which is the smallest model, and 3.5 Opus, which is still going to be the largest model, which you would probably expect to be one of the most intelligent models, but that is not available there. The tool allows you to pick those models, right? And if you remember from my demo, you can just look back, you can just pick whatever model you want from Claude, and depending on the prompt and the capabilities you require, you might choose to go with 3.5 Sonnet or Claude 3 Haiku, because that is what actually going to provide you with the biggest intelligence. That pricing needs to be kept in mind. So this is the full architecture of the solution. Finally, what you can see here is you have on the top, hopefully you can see here. Let me just move. Let's move my mouse. I don't know if you see my mouse. I don't think you can see my mouse, and I apologize. But what I mentioned, you can see my mouse here. If you see here on the top, the web application flower, the CloudFront, and S3, by the way, I'm looking on the side because that's where I have my monitor. That's where the UI is hosted, right? So the UI is a React application that is just using MD framework and components. And you can look at the code, you can change the code, you can create your own UI. But this architecture is using React. We're just creating the static files, storing the static files, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on S3, and then having CloudFront creating an endpoint for us that is distributed across the AWS edge locations for CloudFront, and putting in WAF to make that application secure. Then everything else here where you see the REST API call. So every time, for example, you need to create a template, or you need to save a history, or you need to retrieve the history, the way it works, you have API gateway. And by the way, I didn't talk about Lambda, I just realized, but API gateway integrates very easily with Lambda. Lambda is the serverless compute function as a service solution on AWS. It allows you to write a small code from whatever language. In this case, in this architecture, there are Lambda functions being written in Python, Lambda functions being written in JavaScript. You can choose for other languages. So every time you invoke an API, behind the scenes API gateway you invoke, the Lambda might be running for like maybe 400 milliseconds, 700 milliseconds. You're only going to pay for whatever milliseconds that is running. Let's say you are creating a new template. The way it works is you call the REST API. You need to be authenticated. So you can see Cognito here is doing an authentication for you. If you're not authenticated, you cannot call that API. If you try to call the API, you're going to get a deny request, because that is by default being done by API gateway. And API gateway has integration with Cognito by default, right? So all that layer of authentication is being done on the Cognito and API gateway, which is something that AWS provides to you. But the other capability, which is a really important one, is on the bottom here, and you can see where you have API gateway WebSocket. So when you log into the UI and you send any type of request into the solution itself, the way it works, the user is going to create a WebSocket into the API gateway. Then the user is going to start using that connection of WebSocket to send the request. That request will go to a Lambda. The Lambda will therefore call Bedrock with whatever model you define on the UI. Bedrock will process and do the inference and charge you by input and output tokens. That is going to be sent back to the API gateway WebSocket, and then API gateway WebSocket will know which socket connection that user requested the data. You put that back in and send to the UI. All of that is encrypted end-to-end on the WebSocket connection. And if you have any images from the multimodality capability, you're going to upload them into S3, and then at the time of inference, this Lambda Python streaming is going to download from S3 and send to Bedrock. So that is the capabilities and how you would configure this application. And I'm going to show you in a moment that this is all done with a few commands to easily deploy this end-to-end solution. So let me talk about cost, right? And so it's important to highlight that this cost is public available on the AWS pricing page, but it might change, right? This cost is also based on the US East 1 region. Different regions might have different prices for services, so you might need to take in consideration if you plan to deploy this in another region. But how I decided to provide you with a highlight of how much this solution would estimate, and by the way, it's just an estimate, there is some variables that is very hard to estimate, is let's think that your deployment will have 50 users, and each of those 50 users will use this tool around 5 times a day. And every time they use the tool, they're going to input around 500 input tokens and 200 output tokens, right? This is just a scenario I'm trying to put together so you understand. What you can see here is the other AWS services cost is always going to remain the same. This is the WAF, this is the DynaDB, this is API gateway. This is always going to remain the same for this estimate. But the more users and the more consumption you have, this might increase a little bit more, right? So just keep that in mind, but it's not going to be exponentially more. It depends on how you're doing. If you go to the GitHub page that I'm going to share, you can look at the pricing calculator that I've shared, and then you can just add your specific inputs, or even email me if you have any questions, and I'm happy to help you do the calculation. But what you can see here that depending on the model you use, and by the way, you can use a combination of models, but I'm just putting in this specific slide. Let's say if you only use Claude 3 Haiku for all those 50 users and 5 times a day, the total cost of application is literally only $19.32, which is much more cost efficient than, for example, a subscription for one of these Gen AI chat solutions that are out there, which normally will cost $20+, right? Plus you have full access, full control of your data on your own AWS account. You can choose different models. So for example, I would highly recommend using Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is the most intelligent model. And you can see that it equates to $50.20, 26 cents a month, right? Claude 3 Opus, of course, going to be the most expensive because it's the largest model that Anthropic has made available, but it's one of the most impressive as one, especially when Claude 3.5 Opus is going to be made available. So that is what I wanted to show to you about cost. But in terms of what can you do now? So here you can just click on that button of the open source repository. You are able to just click on that button, navigate. I'm going to show in a moment. I have a demo. It's not going to be a demo. It's just going to be it's going to be a demo of the tool and showing you the GitHub page. But by clicking on the GitHub page or scanning the QR code, you're going to see all the details that I've shown to you today, even the GIFs that are here for the tool itself. How do you deploy? How do you make changes? The architecture diagram, it's all made available. So it's a very simple and easy to deploy on your AWS account. It's going to have the benefits of pay as you go. It's going to be secure and deployed on your own AWS account. So let's jump into a demo now, and then we'll finalize the presentation. Awesome. Just very quickly, I just want to show you the GitHub. So if you go to the GitHub page, feel free to start the GitHub project if you like. But if you scroll down, you're going to see a lot of information. So you can see, for example, the summary. We talked about the benefits that I've presented to you today. It talks about why we've created the solution, why it's useful as an architecture pattern, but potentially as a starting place for you and your internal teams. And you scroll down, you can see the architecture diagram that I presented to you. So you can look at this. Please feel free to ask questions, reach out if you want. And then it talks about the code itself, the structure of the GitHub repository, right? So I have a folder for the backend where all the information for the backend is stored. We are using SAM, Serverless Application Model framework to actually deploy this whole solution. Behind the scenes, just CloudFormation. It just deploys a CloudFormation for you, and it created all those resources. And then you have the front end folder. The front end folder is just literally the React application that gets deployed. But because we wanted to make it easier for people to deploy, we have created this shell script called deploy.sh, and I'll show you instructions how you can easily deploy this into your account. The deploy.sh not only deploys the backend, but also deploys the front end. And also, if you want, it deploys the default templates and the default prompt templates that comes with the solution. So if you look at the templates that are available on the default templates at JSON, if you're not interested in that, or if you want to add, you can just change and modify the specific format of this JSON and rerun the deployment, and you create the templates that are there. You can see some of the requisites that it requires for you to deploy this solution if you're running locally. So you need like Python, you need CLI, you need AWS SAN, you need a Linux environment, or if you're Windows, you should have Windows sub Linux system. You need Py.js and you need JQ. And of course, you need to enable the Bedrock models on your AWS account. Here it goes into instructions how to deploy locally. You can see that we have the deploy sh script that you can set the region. So you can deploy these in whatever region you want to make it available. Just make sure whatever region deploy, you have all the services that are required, especially Bedrock. Currently, Bedrock is not available in every single AWS region. So you want to make sure that those are available there, right? So you can deploy, if you run the deploy command with just the region and email, by the way, this email is required because this is going to be the admin user that is going to be used for your application. You use just the simple command, and the simple command you run and pretty much deploy everything, front end, back end, create a user for you, create a temporary password, and upload the templates as well. But if you just want to deploy the back end or you just want to deploy the front end, you can use these commands, but you can also use these commands to delete. If you want to delete everything, you just run the deploy-delete and you delete all that for you. So it goes into details here. You can also use Cloud Shell to deploy this. So if you don't want to deploy locally, you can just run Cloud Shell. And if you're not familiar with Cloud Shell, is literally you just go here and you click on this button, and this is Cloud Shell. So this is Cloud Shell. It's just a Linux environment that you have access for free on AWS, and you can use this Linux environment following these specific instructions. Please do follow these specific instructions to use as the deployment. So you can use Cloud Shell. And so forth. So if we scroll down, you can also use Cloud9 if you want, which is just an IDE available on AWS to deploy. So you have instruction for that. Once you finalize this, you should see a screenshot similar to this that has been deployed successfully. Once it has been deployed successfully, you're going to give the URL from the CloudFront and then your user and then your password, right? And then once you log in for the first time, you ask you to change that. The other thing that it shows you is the GIFs. So you can see all the GIFs that I've presented. If you want to showcase to your team members or tests, you can see all the GIFs that I've presented to you are available here. And then you have an estimate monthly cost. And remember, when I talk about the pricing for Bedrock, you can click here and you can look at the different model providers. For example, if you go to Anthropic models, you can see each price for 1,000 input tokens and 1,000 output tokens. It's available there. And then finally, the last thing I want to show you on cost. So let me scroll down. We have this pricing page here. So if you click on this calculator, you'll be able to see this calculator, which gives you the idea. And you can see this for US, it's one region. But if you want to change for the remaining services, not Bedrock, because currently Bedrock is not supported on the pricing calculator of AWS. For anything else, you can change the variables and you can receive your own estimate. And of course, here are some more recommendations, like if you want to contribute or like key considerations in terms of security, it's all described here in there. But here's the tool. So like the way it works, the tool I'll show you, just do a quick demo. You need to log in here, right? So you just put your email here. I already have a user, so I'm just going to log in. behind the scenes is authenticating with Cognito, right? And on the playground, I can just ask a question. Another feature that I haven't mentioned that I think is important to highlight, it has support for full code syntax. So let's say I want to write a code, create a CloudFormation template where I have a EC2 named test and a new VPC. You can define the CIDR range for the VPC, right? I can send this. Here I can choose the model, right? I'm just going to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet because it's the best model. And here when I click submit, behind the scenes, remember, it's calling my WebSocket, and then it's calling the WebSocket, the Lambda, and you can see it actually proper formats the CloudFormation template. My CloudFormation template is YAML, so you can see here if I scroll down, it has created the template for me. This is still creating the template, it's creating the EC2 instance, it's creating the outputs. The cool thing here, and it even gives you the explanation. The good thing here is you have these buttons here. So when you click copy all, it's going to copy all the output for you. But if you have code, you can just click on the copy here and it just code the copy for you. So it's easier if you want to put on an ID or something like that. But the chat is pretty cool, right? So let's say I have this chat and let's say I have this. Let's actually do this. Let's talk to chat and let's say, create some Python code that has some very bad bugs because I want to see if I can fix, right? So let's just ask my chat to create that Python code, right? The first time I send the message might take a while. The reason it takes a while because it needs to create some of the database entries, but every future interaction is a little bit faster. So it has created the code. So what I want to do, I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to create a new chat. And I have this template which calls Python bug fix. And I'm going to paste the code here. And let's see if my template, which it comes by default on this tool, helps me fix Python bug codes. I can just, and this is just an example that potentially as a platform engineer, you'll be dealing quite a lot, right? So you can see that he provided the code snippet, has a few issues that needs to be addressed. Here's the corrected version. I don't know, I haven't even gone through this, just a hypothetical example. You can see the specific fix here. It talks about the problems in the original code and so forth. You can say, okay, this is great. Could you rewrite this in Node.js, JavaScript for me, right? So same code, the chat will keep the conversational context so he knows we've talked about it. And I can finalize, say, summarize our conversation so far, please. And you can see it's streaming very quickly. If you look here, the model I'm choosing is Claude 3 Haiku, and that is the model I'm using. So it talks about the conversation, what we talked. So the conversation summarizes that I provided Python code. In my analysis, I identified these issues. Then I provided the correct code. Then you ask me to rewrite from Python to JavaScript, and finally I provide the JavaScript code with the proper information. So I could use just a template. You can see the template is here just as its own. And if you look at the template, if you go here and look at the template, you can click at this option to clone. I don't want to clone, but if you want to add it, you can see that the template just sets a system prompt saying your text to analyze provided Python code snippet and identify any bugs and so forth, right? And it's using the Claude 3 model and so forth. Here is just the input data to provide, right? I can clone, so you can see it creates a copy and I can save a new one. And it forces me to save as private because there is already one that is public. So this is the capability I want to show. Hopefully this makes sense. Please reach out on LinkedIn if you have any questions. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to provide you some guidance on how to deploy these and build on top of that. Generative AI provides a lot of limitless capabilities for us builders and platform engineers to build on top of that. So thank you so much for taking the time and watching my session. Have a great rest of your day and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.